So the idea of this very, very short webinar, we only have 20 minutes, is just to share with you the main misunderstandings that people have when they want to register a federative dossier, and then that when they come to us, they are very surprised to see that things are not how they thought it should be. So we are not going to enter here to discuss how federatives registration work in the European Union. We will simply go directly to those practical examples of things that we have to deal with on a daily basis, okay? Like I say, this is going to be a 20-minute presentation followed by 10 minutes of Q&A. And I have divided the presentation in 3 sections. So in the first part, we're going to be talking about the impact of new regulations and guidelines when you are developing a dossier. I'm also going to discuss some common general misunderstanding that people have and things that people assume when they want to register a federative in the European Union. And then for the last section, we are going to discuss some common misunderstanding that specifically affect microorganisms, that these are one of the most common active substances registered as federatives in the European Union. So for the first point, the first thing that I want to discuss is what happens when you are developing a dossier and then there is the release of either a new regulation or a new guideline. And I'm going to share with you something specific that happened to me when I started to work at Penn & Tech in 2018. That is that between 2017 and 2018, several guidelines were published, and we're talking about new guidances. So for example, we had the new efficacy guidance for studies with target animals, as well as the new microorganism guidance. That it was a very innovative document because before that, in order to get what you have nowadays in the microorganism guidance, you will need to check for the information in 5 different documents. So what happened with applications that were submitted in 2018 when new guidances were into force, but that when you submit in 2018, that means that the studies were developed before. Well, what we saw was that the application of the new guidances was not homogeneous, okay? There were differences. So for example, for products that were based on microorganisms, what happened was that even though you had the justification that you performed your studies for the characterization with the old guidances, EFSA say, okay, but now we have new requirements and we want the microorganism characterized according to the current requirements. So there was no flexibility in that case, which meant that the applicants had to spend more time and money performing new studies. However, and luckily, it was not the same in the case, for example, of the efficacy studies with target animals. We were able to argue successfully in the majority of the cases that the new requirements should not apply because the studies were performed before. And this was back at the time particularly important for products based on enzymes, because the new guidance that was published in 2018 introduced some very new and specific requirements for studies with enzymes regarding the adaptation period and regarding the collection period, for example. Now, you need to be ready because in case that you are not aware, we are going to be facing this situation again next year in 2024. So in Q2 2024, we should have 4 updated guidances that applies federative registration. So we will get the new user safety guidance, that this is actually the pending guidance for update. We are currently working with the version from 2012. We are gonna get an update on the efficacy guidance, an update on the microorganism guidance, and an update on the statement for whole genome sequence analysis. So people that submit dossiers in 2024 need to be aware of this, because they will probably going to be in the situation where they will also, again, will have to justify that the studies were performed under the previous guidances, okay? In this case, we were talking about EFSA guidances. Now we're going to talk about what is still a recent example. That is the transparency regulation that started to apply on dossiers submitted after the 27th of March of 2021. So this regulation has been a game changer, and the main implications are, first, that now you need to notify all of the studies, not only efficacy and safety studies, to a new EFSA database, and that those studies need to be notified before the start date. So this is something that you need to do pre-submission. You also need to deal with a new platform where you're going to submit a dossier with some specific requirements. And it has also changed the way how you need to prepare the confidential information, the file structure and format, as well as how you justify the request of confidentiality for those files. And because of all of this, after you submit the dossier, the part of post-application is longer, more time-consuming, and more bureaucratic. So there was the changes were a lot. Believe me, that is the easiest way to put it, a lot. Everyone was learning, and everyone is still learning, not only applicants, but also the authorities. So since 2021, there has been a lot of back and forward with the authorities regarding to which applications the regulation applies, how some things should be justified, and so on. And also, one of the most important consequences of this regulation is a penalty. It's a penalty of 6 months that you can get, that it will delay the assessment of your application. And this penalty is going to apply if you do not notify your study before your start date and you do not have a proper justification. So this regulation not only affected everyone because it was new and it has a lot of requirements, but of course, in particular, to people that didn't have experience with feed additive dossiers. And EFSA was inflexible, even for dossiers submitted on the 30th of March 2021. When the dossiers were reviewed, if the studies were not notified, and they had to be notified, and the justification was like, okay, we didn't know the transparency regulation, EFSA has been inflexible, and they apply the penalty because not knowing the regulation is not an excuse for not applying the regulation. Then we also have a specific impact of this regulation on renewal dossiers. So feed additive dossiers authorizations last 10 years, and you need to submit the renewal dossier 1 year before the expiry date. So that means that in general, for you to go easy with it, you should start planning the renewal dossier 2 years before the expiry date of the authorization. However, there is a new requirement of the transparency regulation that only applies to renewal dossiers. There is that you need to prepare something called a list of intended studies for all the new studies that you pretend to prepare for a renewal dossier. And that, of course, because you need to do that also in advance before submitting the dossier, and you need to submit the list undergoes public consultation, you wait for feedback from the authority. That means that also you need to add that time on top to the time that you needed to prepare the dossier before 1 year of the expiry date of the authorization. So a lot of people is not aware of this requirement, and we have been involved in a lot of like emergency dossiers that we have to submit at last minute and try to do magic to comply with this new requirement of the transparency regulation. Then for the second section, so common misunderstandings in general that we hear from people, and this is not only from people that is not based in the European Union, but it's also for people, companies that are based in the European Union. So one of them, an authorization for human food will give me an easy entry to the animal feed market. This is not correct. There could be some data that you could use, but first of all, and I'm going to take as example microorganism, because again, it's one of the most common products for which people say, okay, I am in the food side, let me take advantage of that and go to the feed side. In the case of the feed market, the classification of a microorganism is only one. A live microorganism is a feed additive and requires registration. In the case of human nutrition, it could be that your product is novel or not, and therefore you will have to go through that route, or it could go through the food supplements part. So on the food side, you could even be in the situation where you don't have to prepare any data, any registration, and you can go into the food market. And that is never the case on the feed side. You always need a registration as a feed additive. And the other thing that commonly happens when people want to assume that they can make this very easy transition from one world to the other is that it is common to find, regardless of the fact that it's legally allowed or not, claims related to health with some of these products on the human food, that if you will try to make those claim on the animal nutrition side, it will probably classify your product as you are making claims that are for a veterinary medicinal product and not for a nutritional product. Another thing that we commonly hear, EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, approves feed additives. So therefore, you can put your product on the market after the publication of the EFSA opinion. This is not correct. The European Food Safety Authority performs the risk assessment. And what you get in the EFSA opinion is the opinion of the authorities regarding if your product is safe and efficacious. Efficacious means if it has the effect that you are claiming it has. So it's the European Commission who gives you the authorization. So they take this EFSA opinion, discuss it internally at the proper committee, and based on this opinion, they decide if they grant you the authorization or not. In practical terms, this means that after you get the EFSA opinion, you still need to wait some months after you actually get the European Commission authorization. That is also a different document. Another assumption. An EU feed additive authorization is going to allow me to put my product in the United Kingdom market and Switzerland. This is not correct. On the first part in the UK, after Brexit, now the United Kingdom has their own risk assessment process. So what is happening at the moment, that is going to be, the process is probably going to be different as the years goes by, is that because of part of the retained law, you prepare the feed additive under the regulations and guidances for the European Union, and then in general, you send the same dossier to the UK authorities, to the Food Standard Agency, and they perform their own independent risk assessment, and then you're going to get a different authorization for that market. And I am saying in general, it is the same dossier because there are some administrative parts that change. And also remember that the transparency regulations do not apply in the United Kingdom. And then in the case of Switzerland, actually what you need to get first before going to Switzerland is a European authorization. And once you get the European authorization, you go to the authorities there, you are going to have to do some administrative procedures, and then you can get the authorization to go into that market. Another one, the GRAS status, the general recognized as safe status, that is a regulatory pathway in the US, is accepted in the European Union. Once upon a time, one of my first projects, I prepared a list for one of my clients with all of the requirements that they needed for a feed additive registration in Europe. And my client was in shock. It was outraged because they say, how is it possible that I need to generate so much data and that I need to put so much money if my active substance is GRAS, is generally recognized as safe? So first of all, there are important differences in the data sets that you need to provide for these two different regulatory routes, particularly in the part of efficacy. And then remember, well, if you're not aware of these, there are also very important differences in the claims that you can make particularly for the so-technical feed additive category in the European Union. Here, for a feed additive, you can say that improves body weight, whether that is a claim for veterinary medicinal products in the US. And then the other thing is that you need to understand that there is not mutual recognition. There could be some data that you can use for both markets, but if you're interested in running in parallel applications and to get authorizations to enter both markets, the ideal is that you understand from the beginning before performing any study which are the requirements, so you can develop your studies in a way that they can be useful for both. But do not assume that if you only follow the guidelines and regulations from one area, that is going to give you an easy market, something very straightforward for the other one. For the last part, we're going to talk about some common misunderstanding for the registration of microorganisms. So the first one is related to the use of whole genome sequence data for the unequivocal identification of your microorganisms versus the use of older methodologies. The current guidance requires you to provide whole genome sequence data for the identification of bacteria and yeast. And we have been under the situation that when we tell applicants that they need to generate this data because they don't have it, they tell us, well, but that is not necessary, because I did the identification with this other methodology, and this other methodology is recognized by the science world, and I even have my result published in peer review papers. That doesn't matter. In this case, when you are required to provide this type of data for these microorganisms, you need to do it according to the current guidances, and you also need to report it according to the current guidances. That for a microorganism right now is following the principles of the characterization of microorganism guidance, as well as the whole genome sequence statement. That, remember, both guidances are going to be updated next year. Something that also sometimes causes confusion when you are reading the guidance is that regarding the experimental design, the guidance says that for studies with target animals, the most common design is a complete randomized block design, where you have different blocks where you locate your animals, and then you have a random allocation of all your treatments within each block. So sometimes we have applicants nervous because for some specific microorganisms, you cannot apply this experimental design, such as, for example, bacteriophages. Why? Because there will be cross-contamination if you apply this experimental design. So, for example, in the case of bacteriophages, you need to put in separate rooms your control group, where animals are not going to be fed the bacteriophages, and you have to put in a totally different room the animals under the treatment. So we get a lot of questions because people and companies and teams believe that they cannot do this because then the experimental design will not be accepted by EFSA, and that is not the case. In this case, you have a justification. This is actually how you will need to do it, and then you just need to be very careful about explaining to EFSA in your study report why you use that particular design. And we have also seen some issues with cross-contamination with products that are based in aerobic microorganisms. So remember, what is always very important with EFSA when you deviate from the guidance is that you put an explanation in the study report, and never, never, never make the assumption that the panel is going to read your report and they're going to say, oh, yes, I know why they did it, because of cross-contamination. You always have to justify everything. And in many cases, that justification only takes you one line in your study report. Authorizations are strain specific. In the European Union, when you register a microorganism as a feed additive, the authorization always going to be strain specific, which is different from some other regulatory areas where, for example, you could be covered by an entry that accepts no strain specific, but a product under the species category. Here, microorganisms could be even digestive, good flora stabilizer. There is a category where the microorganism is ingested by the animals. So that is going to be a strain specific. You can only put in the market that strain for that functional group. And you could also register a product that is derived from fermentation, from fermentation from a microorganism. So that will be the case, for example, of a vitamin. So because it's a strain specific, and even though the feed additive is the vitamin, that is the product that you put in the market, but because it's derived from fermentation, that means that the vitamin that you can put in the market is only the vitamin produced by that specific strain that received the authorization. So it's very common to have companies that believe that the authorization is species specific and also taking into account, like assuming some equivalence between different regulatory areas. Differences in claims between technological and zootechnical varieties authorization. These ones are very important, and people assume that they can have something registered in the easy category and then to make claims that are for the most complicated category. What that means, like I said before, a microorganism can be directly fed to the animals in the zootechnical category, a good flora stabilizer, or could be, for example, a technological feed additive, a silage additive, right? Something that you use in the fermentation of silages. One of the main differences between these two categories is the type of data set that you have to generate for the registration. In the case of the zootechnical category, you need to perform studies with target animals. In the case of the silage additive category, you're going to have to perform in vitro studies. As you can already imagine, those studies are very different in terms of the cost. So technicals are way more expensive, and in terms of the time that you need to perform the studies, because in the case of silage additive, they are not only in vitro, but that the duration is short. We're talking about just a few days. So of course, what people believe is that they can go through the easy route, through the technological route, and then to put the product on the market with zootechnical claims, because there is evidence showing that they have zootechnical effects. So the first thing is that this is not correct. The claims that you can make on a product are limited or are given by the functional group under which you register the product. And the other thing that I want to highlight, because it's a very common question that we receive, is that, yes, okay, Eliana, but I am seeing on this website that this product is a technological feed additive, but these are the claims that are very clearly zootechnical. Yes, that happens. If you do some research, you're going to find it, but that doesn't mean that that is correct and that is what is legally allowed. And please consider that usually the complaint to the authorities comes from a competitor, okay? The qualified presumption of safety, and this is the last point. So for microorganisms, there is something called the qualified presumption of safety. That there is a list that EFSA puts together, the expert panel, when they summarize different microorganism species that, considering literature available, can be assumed that they are safe for use as feed additives. When you enter into that list, one of the benefits of being in this list is that you can omit certain studies for a feed additive registration. So in general, it will be omitting studies, tolerance studies, studies for showing safety on the target animals. You could omit studies for showing the safety of your product for the environment as well as for the consumer. So it's very common to have clients that assume that because you are in that list, that is either automatically equivalent to have approval, you don't need to do anything, or that you will need to do considerably less than for a regular registration, and that your product is going to be shorter. And that is not true. What it is true is that you are going to save money and time in certain studies, but you still have to undergo through the whole procedure. You're going to have to generate some certain data that you cannot omit. So for example, for efficacy, for the characterization of the product, and the whole risk assessment process is going to be the same. And the last one, assumption related to the qualified presumption of safety, is because people say, okay, if I am on this list, I'm going to be able to omit these studies. And right now, I am not on this list. So then what I want is just to enter into that list. Just give me the procedure to enter the list. There is no procedure for entering the list. You do not prepare a federative dossier and go and tell EFSA, please assess this dossier and just put my microorganism on that list. So how microorganisms enter into this list? Like I say, you do not need to do any separate procedure. What EFSA does is that every time that they receive an application for a product that is based on microorganism and the product is not on the list, they automatically start the assessment to decide if the product goes into the list or not. This is something internal, there are no timelines, it is the panel, and also you don't know when the next list is going to be published, okay? So if you plan just to do this, then I just want to put my microorganism there, know that there is not a procedure for that, and you just need to prepare your dossier for whatever federative category and functional group you're interested on, and the assessment will be done automatically by the authorities without interaction with applicants or the public. So there are many other misunderstanding or wrong assumptions regarding the registration of feed additives, but this is everything that I have to share with you today in this very short time of just 20 minutes. So I'm going to see if you have any questions in the chat. Okay, Norma, I'm so sorry. I really hope that you have been able to hear the presentation later. But when you send your message, I had started already and was not able to see the chat. Hello, Julian. When you ask your question, does this also apply to self-affirmed graphs? Do you refer to like there is no the immediate recognition if it is self-affirmed or notify? I mean, if that is the case, yes, there is no equivalence regardless of the grassroots that you choose. If that was not the question, please let me know. Okay, then I hope that I am saying the name correct. Shu. What specific quality certifications are required for the laboratories conducting animal testing? Will the EU reference laboratory of Jessica? Okay, no, the European Food Reference Laboratory doesn't perform any studies for you, okay? Simply, once you send the dossier to EFSA, they are the official institution that assess if the methods that you are proposing for assessing the feed additive, the analysis of the feed additive in the different matrices, or for example, if residue studies are relevant for you, they assess if they agree with your proposal of the methods for official control. Regarding specific certifications, when it is studies with target animals, with livestock, for example, with broilers, with pigs, you are not required to have a specific certifications. You just need to follow relevant quality standards that you need to explain to EFSA which are those. But you are requested to have GLP certifications, for example, for studies with consumer safety. Okay. Then Adrienne. So when will the new guidances enter into force? Okay, so there is still a little bit of uncertainty, okay, in relation to specifically when they will enter into force. So we know that in June 2024, the updated guidances should be available. But what we still don't know is if they are going to be available in the format of the draft that when EFSA updates the guidances, they first release the draft that goes into public consultation, and then EFSA takes into account the feedback of the public consultation to publish the final guidance. So we don't know if you are going to be at that stage in Q2 2024, or if we will actually have, by that date, the guidance already into force and that you will need to comply with them. That it is still not clear. But for sure, we will have the information about which are the updates on Q2 2024. Okay, so your next question, Shu, is very specific. So this will require further investigation to give you advice regarding your specific case, okay? Yes, correct, Julian. There is no mutual recognition regardless of the grassroots that you choose. It is just that, so therefore, in that case, like I said before, the best thing that you can do, and this is something that the majority of our clients do when they want registration in both areas, is to understand which are the requirements for both, for the US and the EU, and to plan everything in a way that the data that you can actually use from one area to the other, it is from the beginning, from when you design the experiment. So, okay, I am also checking my time, but since I took more time for the presentation, I'm going to give that time to the chat. Okay, Ana, Martin Gonzalez, that is a very good question. Okay, so this is what happens. If you check the efficacy guidance, you are going to see that there is an option contemplated on the efficacy guidance that says that you could support efficacy based on published literature, okay? Studies published on peer-reviewed journals. But the fact that you are published on a peer-reviewed journal doesn't mean that you still do not have to comply with the EFSA requirements. And I am talking mainly, for example, regarding the study duration, regarding the type of endpoints that you measure, and also regarding the supportive information that you need to submit to the authorities for a study support and efficacy. So what happens in the majority of cases, if not all, that, okay, you have the published article, and then when you start to cross-check the characteristics of that experiment with the requirements of the EFSA guidance, they do not match, either because the study was shorter, or either because you didn't measure certain specific endpoints that EFSA wants to see. And also, even when you comply with that and you submit the paper, and you want to submit a paper, the paper is not the only thing that you submit. You also need to submit the additional data that you will submit with a study report. And then when we go there, and then again, the majority of the cases is not, if not all, I have not been able to find yet literature that will be enough to support the efficacy part, like completely, only as a supportive. What you find is that a lot of that supporting information is not available. So for example, very common, there is not a certificate of analysis of the active substance. There is not a certificate of analysis that shows analytically that after you mix the feed additive with the feed, that you can confirm analytically that the 250 ppms that you wanted to add of the feed additives are there. And in general, there are a bunch of certificates of analysis that are not available. We also find with the studies performed in other regulatory areas that the statistical outputs are not available, that the raw data is not available in the format that EFSA want to see it. So in summary, the option is there, but it's very, very difficult to find a published article that it was not designed originally to comply with EFSA that you can use to support a feed additive application. Adrian. The transparency regulation applies to new dossiers and renewal dossier after the 27th of March of 2021. And then, I'm reading your question, Sue, because it's long, so you just give me 1 second. Okay, yes, that is correct. Authorizations for feed additives in the European Union, we have two main categories. Well, among many other categories, that there are authorization is holder specific or is not holder specific. So when it's holder specific, which is the case of coccidiostats and histomonostat, and so technical feed additives, only the company that holds the authorization can put the product on the market, or partners that they're authorized. And then what is non-holder specific, such as a silage additive, a vitamin and amino acid, everyone that can comply with the specifications of the authorization can put the product on the market. So that is correct. Okay, everyone. Well, right now we have run out of time. Thank you very much for joining us today. And then if you have any other questions, please feel free to send us an email. I hope you have found the webinar useful, and I wish you all a great weekend. Bye-bye.